It is good to see you all. I wanted to speak to you today about moving at the speed of God. And the reason I want to speak to you about moving at the speed of God is because 9 times out of 10 I'm out of step with where God is. And I'm either just too late or just too early, but never quite on time to meet with him in the place that I would like to meet, in the place that I ought to be. So I don't know what you're like on timekeeping. Are there any terrible timekeepers here? Yeah, and the rest of you can put your hands up as well. There's only one or two being honest there. But I found in the church, I came from a background that was a military background. And so we were taught that if you're going to go anywhere, you've got to be there at least 5 minutes before. 5 minutes before, so that you're never late. And if you were late, if you were 5 minutes late, it was an hour's pay. 10 minutes late, 2 hours pay. 15 minutes late, it was a day's pay. And so we were always 5 minutes early, and that's how it worked. But then I came into the church, and it's a bit like, you know, as and when. And it's Wednesday. Oh, I should be at such and such a place. Oh, I'm not there. Oh, never mind. And so we began to move at a completely different pace. And so I want to talk about the kind of rhythm, the eternal rhythm that God works at and already sets in our hearts, because we're made in the image of God. Therefore, there's a rhythm of creation that's set within us. And it's not about whether you're 5 minutes early or you're 5 minutes late in this particular case. This is about the rhythm of the universe. And those beautiful chapters right at the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, where they begin to speak of a rhythm of God. And they begin to speak in terms of time. First of all, there's light, and then there's dark. And then God separates the waters, and there's heaven, and then earth, and then plants, and then trees, and then sun, and then moon, and then living creatures, animals, birds, all kind of creatures. And then right at the end of that rhythm of bringing eternity into our lives, he creates us. And we are made in his image. And I believe that rhythm is still there, even though in our days we cannot see it in the way that we once could. I mean, we look at climate change now. I notice I don't do any media stuff at all. I haven't got time to do it. My head's already full of nonsense. And but my wife does Instagram. So she's a gardener, so she's there on Instagram. And I can hear her muttering under her breath, idiot, idiot, idiot. It's only March. You can't do that in March. You're going to have to wait. You need to wait till May for that plant. And she's going through. And she's had a rhythm set within her for gardening, for knowing what will work. And she says to me, there's 3 limiting factors in gardening, John. She says it's light, it's heat, and it's moisture. And she says if you don't get those right, whatever you're trying to do will either grow too leggy and not do well, or die before you've even started. And she's looking at a rhythm on Instagram of gardeners that want to get off the blocks because it's March already, isn't it? And you think, you know, it's March, it should be getting better. But the last good day we had, the warm day, was probably back in September. So we're coming into month 6, and people are trying to get off the mark, off the blocks too early. But there's a rhythm there that can't be denied when it comes to gardening. And there's a rhythm there that can't be denied when it comes to living the life of a Christian in the church that we're in. And we know when things are out of rhythm. We know when things aren't quite right. It upsets us, and we can sense it. And when we look at our climate now, you can sense the change in our climate. And if you can't sense it in this land at this particular moment, you can certainly sense it abroad. And people are worried, and people are rightly scared that somehow we've gone out of rhythm. You remember Krakatoa? I don't remember Krakatoa. I just said remember Krakatoa. I don't. It was 1883. Krakatoa, when that went bang, the noise from Krakatoa was heard 3,000 miles away in the Marshall Islands. It was heard 1,800 miles away in Australia. People knew something had gone wrong. And they knew almost in an instant, well, the speed of sound moving across water. But then it took time for most of us to begin to cotton on, because the repercussions of somewhere like Krakatoa came slowly to us. The amount of pollution in the air gave us 3 or 4 years of cold, nasty weather, where things didn't grow in the way that they ought to grow. We knew something was wrong, something was out of sync. I remember, in the Gulf War, after the Gulf War finished, everything didn't start up again then. I remember standing looking at slate grey skies for nearly 2 years because all the oil wells had been set on fire. And there were blue, deep, grey skies. And there was one guy who looked at that and thought, how do we solve this problem? How do we get ourselves back into the rhythm that we ought to get back into? You know what he did? He got 2 big jet engines, aircraft jet engines, and put them on a trailer and backed them into the fires that were burning and the oil wells and blew them out. But it was still some years before we began to get into a rhythm again. So what's it like for us in the church? Do you feel uneasy? Do you feel happy? Do you feel that we're in the right rhythm? What's it like to be out of step? I want to tell you a true story. It is true. And it's probably one of the most terrible incidents in the Royal Navy ever. We'd been sent down to Yeovilton. And we had to go to Yeovilton. And we were just doing some work on Phantom aircraft. You know when you're old, when you go to the museum at Yeovilton now and all the aircraft you used to work on are in it. It's true. And we're working on Phantom aircraft. But when you were working on Phantom aircraft, you used to do that up in Scotland. And so there was a detachment of Navy sent to Scotland. And I was only a young lad, I was about 18. And so we went up to Scotland, we were on an RAF base, and they didn't want anything to do with you because they didn't understand you. And we didn't understand them. And so you sort of go a bit feral, this detachment on its own. And we were sent back down to Yeovilton. And by the time we got back down to Yeovilton, we were probably 60% pirate by then. And you're always meant to take your kit with you. Wherever you go, you take your number 1 kit. I don't know why. So you look tidy when you die or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, you have to have your number 1 kit. And we never took it, and we just disappeared down to Yeovilton. And there was a parade on the Friday. And they were having a parade, and we thought, we'd get away with that. We can get home. And I wanted to go back to Manchester for the weekend. But there's a Rear Admiral coming. And the commander on the camp knew how scruffy and ugly we all were. And decided that he was going to put us, our detachment, on parade with the rest of Yeovilton, even though we didn't belong to Yeovilton anymore. And we didn't have our kit. And so we pinched kit and borrowed kit wherever we could. At bands, everything. And we went and we had to go on parade. And we knew it was bad because they put us on with the cooks. And they're dangerous. So the cooks were there. And we're all out on parade. Now, there was over 1,000 people on parade. And this is what happened. The Rear Admiral came round and inspected us and was disgusted with what he saw with our platoon. And we were expecting that anyway. So he wasn't very happy, and he went back to his podium. And then when he goes back to his podium, he hands out a few medals. And then the guard that had been on parade in front of us all, they turn around, and then we all get ready to march off. And we've got to march past his podium, eyes right, past the podium, and then off, hopefully, into the sunset to get on the bus. Except, what had happened was, in the Navy, we march. Well, we don't march, we stroll. And we have a look around us. And it's sort of this pace. And that's how we march in the Navy. But for some reason, somebody thought it was a good idea to get the Green Howards band, the army. So we march about 116 paces a minute, if we can be bothered. But the Green Howards, Yorkshire Regiment, 140 paces a minute they march at. So this band started going, boom, 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 boom. And off they go, these lot. And it looks like they're running, and we wondered whether we needed numbers for our back, because we had to follow these. And if you've ever seen Chariots of Fire, that last bit where they're running down the beach, we were like that. And some of us were trying to get into the rhythm of it, 140 paces a minute. Some thinking I'm sticking at 116 paces a minute. I don't care what happens. And so by the time we got to the podium, we were all over. They were stretched out about 40 yards. And other people had made the effort as well, but weren't doing very well. But the Rear Admiral hated us because of the way that we'd gone on parade and the way we looked. And he always has a runner by him. And so once you've marched past, you can watch it on TV, there's a runner stand there. And if you don't do very well, he'll just say, round again to the runner. And the runner comes to the front of your platoon, the platoon commander, and says, round again. And you go round again. Well, we went round again, and then we went round again. And then this is true, and then we went round again. And then the band got on a bus and left. And in the end, we were the only one, the only platoon still there on the ground, and the Admiral on his podium like this. And then we were going round, and it was the fourth time. We'd walked about nearly 2 miles by now. The fourth time, and the Admiral whispered something to his runner, and then got off the podium and disappeared himself. And we were alone with a runner stood by the podium. And round we went again. And we went round, and this runner's on his own, stood there, and we went past him. And then he come over to us, he said, the Admiral said, round again. And we had to go round again on our own before we could go home. And the problem was, not just the green hours, but that was the main problem, that the green hours were moving at 140 paces a minute. And we were trying to move at 116 paces a minute. And we couldn't do it. And everything was out of sync. So the first question I want you to just have a chat about between yourselves, just for a few minutes, is on what occasion have you been out of rhythm as a church or just in the life that you lead in the communities in which you live? And just discuss that with the people with you. When we are out of rhythm and why? Sounds to me like there's plenty of occasions where we've got out of rhythm. Not surprised. For us, at that particular moment, even just being a young lad, there were 4 reasons really why we ended up as bad as we were. And the first one was that we'd annoyed everyone, and especially the person we shouldn't annoy, which was the Rear Admiral. We were ill prepared. We knew what we should have done, but we couldn't be bothered doing it. And so we were ill prepared. And that's led to the annoyance. We hadn't planned well at all. We just turned up on the day and hoped everything would go okay. And the worst thing was, we couldn't do things together anymore. So it's quite fun being a pirate up on your own somewhere in Scotland. But we'd lost that idea of what it was to work with the Navy. And we'd lost that sense of doing things together. Now, it didn't end in death or bloodshed. I just missed my train to Manchester and had to get a later one. Which is all right, isn't it? But then when you look at Caleb, and you look at Joshua, and you look at that moment that is critical for the people of Israel, out in the middle of nowhere, that is critical to their future. You look at that mark where God says, now is the time to move into the promised land. And you find that there's an argument. That Caleb's there saying, yeah, we can do this. We can do what God wants for us. And then people who have been out with him into the promised land start arguing against him. They're not doing things together at all. They say, we can't do this. Have you seen them lot? They're massive. You remember the Naphtali? You remember the giants, the story of the giants? I'm sure some of them lot are still giants. There is no way on planet Earth that we can take this promised land now. And at the moment that God wanted them to work together, they were ill-prepared, they were ill-tempered, and they were not a team. And the consequence of that for them, for nearly all of them, was that they died in the position that they were already in. They just moved around a bit every day for the next 40 years. And so they fossilized into that group of people that drove Moses mad for the best part of 40 years. Until they came to a new way of thinking, brought about by a new generation, where they were able to feel confident to move into the position that God had asked them to move into 40 years previously. And when you look at stories like that, it's quite scary, really, isn't it? Because then I begin to think, well, you know, I've just told a bit of a funny story of when we were ill-prepared and when we annoyed people and when we didn't work as a team. But actually, in the scheme of heaven and eternity, there are times when we are required to get it absolutely spot on. And that worries me. So I want to move, if I can now, to a story that we all know. But I just want to read a bit of that for you. So it's the story of the raising of Lazarus. And it's John, isn't it? And it's John chapter 11. So, you know the story. Jesus is with his disciples. He's not at Bethany. He's not with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But he gets a message to say that Lazarus is not well. And Lazarus is ill. And so he's expected to turn up at Bethany. Because you see, Mary and Martha were told, and Lazarus, that's his friends. And when your friends aren't well, that's the time that you turn up. And not just that, you're Jesus of Nazareth. And people have put their trust in you, and people have seen you do things that other people can't do, that they know at this time and this moment for them is critical. We need the kind of person that you are, Jesus, to be here now with your friends to see this friend who is sick. Jesus heard this message from Mary and Martha. And he says to his disciples, this illness doesn't lead in death, it's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, if it had said that to us, it doesn't lead in death, you think, okay, that's great, Lazarus is sick, he's not dead. Therefore, it leads to Lazarus being made well. And then even more confusingly, we're told that Jesus loves Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But he stays another 2 days where he is. Well, surely that's not in the rhythm of the kind of church that we know, is it? That's not the way that we're expected to deal with people. So what on earth is Jesus doing? After 2 days, he says, now we'll go. Let's go to Judea again. And the disciples are thinking, well, okay, we'd like to go and help our friends, but it's a bit scary, and I'll tell you why, because the Jews tried to kill us last time we were there. So do we really want to go down there? It'd be better if we stayed here. You've stayed 2 days now anyway, maybe Lazarus has got better. It's a bit late to turn up now. But Jesus says he's going. He's going to Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And it's Thomas, the doubter, who says, all right, well, we might as well go with him and die as well. Great outlook, really, isn't it? We might as well go. We'll go and die with him, shall we? This is the important thing. So when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, when he heard, he waited 2 days. So even if it took him a couple of days to get there, the chances are that had he gone there at that particular time, Lazarus had already died anyway. But he takes his time. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. If any of you have been there, you know it's just over the hill from Jerusalem. So many of the Jews had come to Martha and to Mary to console them concerning the brother. Martha heard that Jesus was coming. You know what Martha's like. So Martha's up like a shot, going to sort Jesus out. And when she gets to him, she said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And she said, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, though they die, yet shall they live. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Well, I bet if he'd have said, do you believe that I'm going to go have the stone moved and then Lazarus is going to come out of the tomb alive? Do you believe this? She'd have probably worried at that. See, what happened there, I believe, happens to us all the time. Martha comes to him and she says to him, if you'd been here at the time that I wanted you here, my brother would be okay. Have you ever felt like that about your church? You know what, God, if you'd have turned up 15 years ago, when all was well, when there was a chance of saving what we've got, if you'd have turned up then, we'd probably be all right now. Have you ever thought that? That God's arrived late? I have. I've wondered where God's been when I've turned up somewhere and he doesn't seem to be there at all. And Martha and Mary, actually, if you read the rest of the story, are looking back because it's easier to look back with rose-coloured spectacles. And it gets even easier as you get older. I'm 65 this year, and I look back all the time now, and I don't want to, but I keep looking back. And in many ways, it's a nice way to look. It's a nice direction to look in. You know, things seem simpler. I only had one church then. I only had 2 churches. We only had 1 PCC. Now I've got 7. Now I've got 10. And so it goes on. It was better then. And if God had have acted then, when I was working hard but I could manage, that would be brilliant. But instead, he turns up now, when everything has gone for a ball of chalk. And although I know that God can do whatever God wants to do, I'm not sure that he's going to do anything at this moment in time, based on what I've seen and the pain I've felt. Martha does what we all do. When challenged by God, when challenged by Jesus, who says, your brother will rise again, and means he's going to rise again now. Now we know the whole story. She goes from the past and throws it into the future, doesn't she? I know somewhere over the rainbow everything's going to be all right. I know that. You know, I know somewhere in God's economy, I know he loves me. I know I'm made in the image of God. I know I'm precious in his sight. I know my scriptures. I know how it all works. But it can't work at this moment, can it? So somewhere in the future, it's easier to believe in the Jesus that I love, doing what I need him to do, and taking away the pain that I feel at this moment. But now, just doesn't seem to be happening. It can't be possible. And Jesus pulls her back into the now. And he says to her, your brother's going to rise again. He has a similar conversation with Mary, who he also loves. And then is that momentous moment where Lazarus rises from the dead. And Jesus confirms that they're in the right place at the right time. And at that moment, and only at that moment, Lazarus rises from the dead. And they are astonished. So moving at the speed of God, moving into that place where his eternity meets our temporal life, is essential that we get to that place in order to see God acting in our lives and in our church. But it's a painful place to be in. Because so often it just seems like it's death and destruction all around us. So often it seems like there's no hope. But yet there is hope. So often it feels like God might love us, but not quite at this moment, because I seem to be failing in everything. Everything I try doesn't work. Now, if God has set eternity in our hearts, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God, how do we get to that place as individuals, and how do we get to that place as a church where we know that Lazarus can rise from the dead? How does it work for us? God asks us to move with an eternal rhythm that he set into our hearts when he first formed us from the earth. The rhythm which is so often lost in the world in which we live today. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, everybody's talking about Gary Lineker at the moment, but the one thing that happens on football and a lot of sport as well is, the one sentence you'll hear time and time again is, let's have a look at that goal again. Let's have a look at that tackle to see if it was a foul or if it wasn't. Let's look at that tackle to see if it was a penalty or not. We're able to chop time up, to move it forward, to move it backwards, to re-examine, to look at it, to put it in tiny pieces, to stretch it out, to make it short. And it's hard to live in a world like that, where we can chop time up continually. But God has set a rhythm in our hearts for each and every one of us. And it's only when we feel and sense that rhythm and begin to live within that rhythm that we will see Lazarus rise from the dead. There are some naysayers in all of this, we're told. Lazarus rises from the dead, and suddenly they decide, hang on a minute, that's not the sort of church I want to belong to. I don't want people coming out of the tomb when they're not meant to come out of the tomb. I like things tidy. When you're dead, you're dead. That stone should stay where it is. We should carry on doing what we're doing. We can't just march time, keep time as a church. We can't keep tidy because that's the best thing to do. All we do is die tidy. But decisions were made on that day, you know. Unbelievable. Lazarus rises from the dead and some people go and complain. So we've got to decide as a church what we want as well, haven't we? We've got to decide that we actually want Lazarus to rise from the dead. We've got to be in the same frame of mind of Martha in that respect, that my brother's gone and all I want is my brother back. That the church is gone and nobody loves us and nobody cares for us anymore, but we want that back. We've got to decide that. Or we're just going to keep a set of empty buildings and hang on by our fingernails until slowly but surely we fall off. And it's the last one, turn the lights out, turn the lock on the door. How many times have you seen articles in newspapers or the Church Times or anywhere else where it says that by the year 2033 there will be nobody left in the church in Wales, or nobody left in the Church of England, or whatever it might be, because the decline means that that is the point where we hit the bottom line and that it's all over. It's not true. It's never been true, and it never will be true. And all we have to do, I believe, as a church, is to move into that place where God acts, and to hit that mark at the right time, in the right frame of mind, with the equipment that we need to carry out the job that we need to do, that he's called us to, and with the right frame of mind so that we can love each other as we love ourselves, and we can be a team that works together. I sincerely believe that to be true. So the second question, I think, to give you all a break, is, has there ever been a moment, and this is for lay and for ordained as well, because we all have a ministry. I hope you believe that. We've all got a ministry. Has there ever been a moment in your ministry, in your Christian life, when you've sensed that you're in perfect alignment, that somehow that rhythm that God has set within you has come to fruition, and you're in the right place at the right time to receive that blessing? Discuss. There's obvious moments in the Bible where you can see people suddenly arrive at the right place at the right time, and they have to make that decision. You can see it with Ruth, can't you? When Ruth has lost her husband, but her mother-in-law has lost her sons, and Ruth decides that somehow this moment, this momentous moment, is important, and she needs to act. Wherever you go, I'll go. Your God will be my God. You're not leaving me. I'm coming with you. A momentous moment there that changed everything for Ruth. And I believe that was the moment when Ruth dropped into the rhythm that God wanted for her life, and everything changed for her. You can look at Elijah on the top of a mountain, looking for God all over the place. So fed up, I just want to die, he says. Just want to die. You know what? I've had it up to here. I have no idea what's going on. I just know that woman wants to kill me, and she will. And God just whispers to him. But it's only because he's on that mountain, on Mount Horeb, that God can whisper to him. Because for the previous time of trial, that 40 days, as it says in the Bible, that time of trial, he was too tired to think of anything. And all he could do was run. But he ran to the place where God was and is. And suddenly, it makes sense. All of these things that have been going round in his head, suddenly, by God simply saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" it drops into his heart. And it makes sense. And it's a God moment. And there's a God moment there with Peter as well, isn't it? Peter, who feels like he's failed, a massive failure. Always either running ahead or arguing or fighting or saying the wrong thing or saying he can do something and then he can't do it. Failure. It takes all of those failures to get him to that point where Jesus is able to say to him, "You're it. You're what I want. You are the rock on which I'm going to build this church. You are the person who is in the right place at the right time." And it just feels, when you read that passage, that for the first time, Peter's actually in the right place at the right time. And everything changes. I don't know what it was like for you. For me, it was beer cans. And it sounds flippant, but it's not. I was in a particular parish, and it wasn't great, and there was all kinds of problems there, and most of the congregation had fell out with each other. Well, that's our usual problem. So half had left and half had stayed, and the half that stayed you wished had left and the other half had stayed. And, you know, there's all that kind of thing going on, and we're in debt. And I had a phone call. And this woman said to me, "When are you going to come and tidy up this graveyard?" I thought, "Oh, here we go." And I said, what's up with the graveyard? She said, "There's a load of beer cans here. Some kids have been drinking down the graveyard. They brought a shopping trolley full of beer, and then they've thrown the cans all round and left the shopping trolley there." So I said, "I'll be down. I'll come and tidy it up." And I went down to the graveyard, and there was nothing there. So I thought, brilliant. She's beat me, and she's gone home. So I thought, great. So I went back home, easy job. Went back to the house. The phone rang again. She says, "Are you coming down to the graveyard or what?" I said, "I've just been down. There's no beer cans there." She says, "Well, where have you been?" She says, "Because I'm looking out my window at them now." And I said, "I've just been down the graveyard at St. James Church." She says, not that graveyard. She says, the other graveyard. I didn't know I had another graveyard. That's the truth. I had no idea I got another graveyard. I said, well, all right. I tried to sound like I didn't know I had another graveyard. Well, where are you then? What's your address? Rose Hill, she said. So I went to Rose Hill, and sure enough, there's a graveyard, and it's a bit of a field. It's sort of just off the centre of Holywell. And they took all the gravestones down some years ago. You know when they used to put them all the way around the edge of the graveyard? Don't do it anymore. They all shout at us for doing that now. So they cleared all these gravestones, and there were all the beer cans, and the shopping trolley still on its side, and this woman looking at me balefully out this window. But it was in that moment that somehow I'd turned up at the right place, at the right time, for God to actually get through to this thick skull. And I looked over the wall of that graveyard, and I thought, just deeply within my heart, well, this is where the church should be. This is where we should be, in the middle of Holywell. And not on a ski slope on the outskirts of Holywell. If you had a pram, you could get down to the church, but you couldn't get back up with it unless you wanted a good push. Or if you got sticks, you got no chance, just roll down the hill, but we'll never get you back. And there was only 6 car parking spaces, and everybody hated each other anyway. We were all getting very testy with each other. And I thought, this is where we should be. But because I knew that it was a God moment, that suddenly I fell into the rhythm that God wanted for that life in Holywell, that I was able to go to people and say the most ridiculous thing when they were in debt. Do you think we should build another church back up in Holywell that people could actually get to? And nobody said no. And these few people that we got left, who were as skint as I was, said, yeah. And I went and saw an old lady called Molly Busher, and she was 92 then. And I went to see Molly Busher, and I said, Molly, what do you think? She's a godly person, saintly woman. I said, I'm thinking perhaps we should have a church back up at Rose Hill, at that graveyard I pretended I now knew all about. And there were tears coming in her eyes. And I said, are you all right? And she says, you're not joking with me, are you? And I said, I'm not joking with you, I'm just asking you. I said, I just feel that if we were there, instead of where we are, and we were able to build the kind of church that we ought to be, the kind of building that actually serves the community, that we might be in with a shout. And she said, you do know that I was the organist at that church, don't you? And then that was the second thing I didn't know that I just found out. And I said, what church? She said, the church that was on the grounds there. I was the organist. And she says, my children used to go to that church. And I said, I didn't know, Molly. I said, I'm not having you on. I said, that's what I think. And because we were in the right place at the right time, we saw God move in a miraculous way in Holywell. And the things that go on at that church now truly are miraculous. I'm so proud of Father Dominic, who's there now. You know, we built the church, and you go through all that angst of, you know, what it's like with projects and everything, till in the end we build a brand new church. You know, I couldn't stand the sight of it when I built it. But that's what God asked me to do. And we built a reasonable congregation. And I always wondered in the back of my mind, you know, we've done all right there. There are a lot more people going to church now, but it just didn't feel like it had fulfilled its purpose. Well, it's fulfilling its purpose now. And I know now in my heart why we built it. But it all began with beer cans. And it all began with me feeling I better go and tidy a churchyard up that I didn't even know I had. In a place where there was a church that I didn't even know had existed. Because I got into the right place at the right time. Now, you've got in your banner behind me, faith in the future. And faith is being sure of what you hope for, isn't it? And being certain of what you don't see. That's what faith is. And I know faith is in the future. But we serve a faithful God that lives in eternity, in the eternal present. And God asks us, as temporal beings, to pull that future into the present, to begin to move in the same rhythm and the same speed that he has. And then we see our Lazarus rise. And then we see our church rise. And it's not just about our church, is it? We see people that we know in the streets that we would love God to bless by his presence in their lives. We see those lives changed. And we see the kingdom of God grow into what it ought to be. Until in the end, wherever that end is, whenever that end is, we all live with God in his eternal presence. The presence that he calls us to. So it's a wonderful thing if we as church can do that. But my great fear is that at the moment we're not doing it. We're feeling tired, we're feeling a bit down, we're feeling whatever. And the world seems to do everything better than us, doesn't it? Better presentations. Does TV, we can't do TV. Does big shows, does big concerts. We can't do those, not in the way that the telly can do it, not in the way that the world can do things. So what on earth can we do? What have we got that the world has not got? We have got Jesus. We have got Jesus moving into our lives in the same way as he moved through the lives of the people at the time that he walked earth. We have got Jesus. And the world hasn't. And our task is to bring that Jesus into the world that hasn't. And to be confident in that. And to just wallow in his presence. Not in a way that just makes us fat and lazy and fed up. Not in a way that we think, oh, well, you know what, I can't bother, but somehow God will make it all work out in the end. I can't do it. But he asks us to walk with him. And to be with him in those moments that we read about in our scriptures, transferred into our lives today. And if we can do that, and if we set our minds to walk in the rhythm that God has set us in our hearts, then we shall not fail. It won't be round again for us. It won't be 40 years in the wilderness of I abhorred this generation. It will be the people of God in the place that God has called them, seeing the miracles of God work in their lives and in the life of the world that he set in place for us and because of us. Amen.